on sex education with Mr. Hans Billimoria. I am Minasha Sammal Divakara, the team lead of Team Law and Humanities, and I will be the moderator this morning. For those of you who do not know our guest speaker today, Mr. Hans Billimoria is an actor, he's an activist, and he has done numerous programs on sex education and awareness programs all over the country for schools, for private companies, both in Sri Lanka and abroad. So he is definitely the authority in the field, and we are extremely grateful that you could be here today, Mr. Billimoria, despite your very busy schedule. So let's dive right in. And the first question that we have for you is that sex education has been a taboo topic, but there is an issue as to why is it like that? So what do you think, since you have been all over Sri Lanka and you have done programs all over Sri Lanka, what do you think about the system of sex education in this country, and whether you think it is a taboo actually?
Let me begin by this. The health and physical of Sri Lanka, beginning in grade 7, does have information on sex and reproduction.
Yes.
So if you take a look at the grade 7 teacher manual, for example, not in the student book, but in the grade 7 teacher manual, there is a section, the need to discuss how natural masturbation is in the classroom. Okay, so I'm going to park that there. Then if you take a look at grade 8 and 9, the information in it, because we've been tracking this since the mid-2000s, the information in books have been steadily improving with every review. So you have information on the reproductive systems, male and female reproductive systems. You have very good information on menstruation, including how menstruation shouldn't be taboo, including how concepts like kili or being unclean, not scientific expert. You have then, when you come to grade 11, health and physical education, which is an optional subject for the O-levels. Grade 9 is where the compulsory subject ends. The grade 10 and 11 curricula on health and physical education is even better. So if you take a look at information around HIV, for example, or other sexually transmitted infections, the information is pretty good. On HIV, they have information on antiretroviral therapy and how HIV is now a chronic manageable condition. So it's a far cry from the AIDS narrative that was there back in the day.
Yes.
Okay, so there have been consistent improvements within the texts of the prescribed curricula for health and physical education. Now, first issue, the ABC methodology that is generally followed for prevention of sexual transmission of HIV. This is a ABC methodology that is global. The first one is abstinence. The second one is be faithful to your partner. And the third one is C, correct and consistent use of a condom. Okay, that is your standard ABC methodology. In the Sri Lankan textbooks, this is how it reads. Don't have sex before marriage. Fine, that's a standard abstinence approach. Be faithful to your spouse. Again, fine, in line with that. Assess your risks and take precautions. Right?
Very vague.
Very vague, very oblique. They have not included the word condom in the text. When you ask the group of textbook writers why you do not use the word condom in your textbook, their response is, that means if we put the word condom in, kids will read it and go and experiment. My standard response in those instances is lamai ara pothe kiyanakang inne athada balanna. As in, kids are not waiting for them to read the word condom in a textbook to learn about condom or to experiment. Right? Now let's come back to the grade 7 book, the teacher manual, which has a section on how to discuss masturbation as natural in the classroom. They may have that section, but I can tell you now that in our involvement with health and physical education teachers from Colombo to Gaul to Batticlo, none of those teachers use that section. Teachers are taking decisions not to teach parts of this curricula, right? Now, this is where we have a problem. So it's not that we don't have sex education in Sri Lanka or information on sex and reproduction. It is a situation where teachers are being given the authority arbitrarily to decide what to teach and not to teach. So it is like a maths teacher deciding you don't need to know about algebra because I decide that you don't need to know about algebra. Or like an English teacher deciding I'm not going to tell you what a preposition is because that is useless information to you. It is not appropriate for you to know. You understand? So it is mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling that our teachers are not being reviewed or not being monitored in the implementation of what is emerging to be a fairly decent curricula. Okay? So, for example, in 2012, they had homosexuality listed as a form of child sexual abuse.
Oh,
That
okay.
reference is no longer there. Okay? That reference is no longer there. It has been removed. But everybody up to 2012 read that homosexuality is a form of child sexual abuse. Okay.
Yeah, and I have to agree because all of us here were students of this system of sex education, and I can assure you we learned very little from that education, and everything that we did learn was from the internet.
No, so now that is where that perfect point. So for me, this access, this unprecedented access to information online is all the more reason why you need a sensible, scientifically accurate, non-judgmental program in the classroom. Because you need this sensible approach in the classroom that gives you the in order to ensure that you counter as much as possible the narratives that you find online, primarily one being which that pornography is sex. Pornography is not sex, but the thinking or the idea that pornography is sex needs to be actively countered in the classroom. The problem that we have encountered is that our teachers, our health and physical education teachers, are not being given the requisite skills that they need. Part of that problem is because health and physical education have been connected. So you have the PE instructor who is now expected to go and talk about menstruation, right? So he is there to play volleyball. He is there to teach basketball. So it is not then a million miles away to imagine that when these more sensitive subjects comes, he says, "Api meka enasatiya karamu me ada gihilla volleyball drill ekak karamu." You know what I mean? It's
Yes, I do, and we did experience that.
correct. So he has not got the skills. So we need whatever pressure that, let's say, your organization is putting on this issue around education, around sex and reproduction, needs to really look at what exists and how teachers need to be trained to, at least for now, to deliver the existing curricula. For now. Now, this existing curricula, for me, saying sex education also is a little bit reductive, to be frank. For us, we look at this not just in terms of sex, but in terms of relationships. So we feel very strongly that you need a broader sort of relationship education mandate, a part of which sex and reproduction sit. But it needs to start much early. So we need to take a look at, for example, early childhood learning. We need to take a look at concepts like respect, empathy, consent, which is very important within a relationship and not really understood. Trust, what it means to build trust. We need to take a look at these issues in an age-appropriate manner right from the start. So I am saying a broader relationship education mandate in an age-appropriate manner where you start these concepts young with kids in preschools and primary schools, and then as they have done and as they have correctly and scientifically identified the ages of adolescence within the health curricula, introducing grade 7, grade 8, grade 9 as they have, but obviously give the teachers the skills. Unless they do that, we continue to go around in circles.
Yes, the next problem that we had, was that the critiques of establishing a sex education system. For instance, the biggest barrier that we have had so far in making comprehensive sex education possible was this criticism that it is against our culture. So there are generations that do not agree with establishing sex education, and there is a problem. Like this project, for example, if it had reached those audiences that are so against it, we would have received so much backlash. For instance, the clergy, religious leaders, or in fact the elders, like people in our grandparents' generation. They have such a cringeworthy attitude towards sex. That is probably the country's fault as well, because the moment we talk about sex in this country, everyone cringes and doesn't want to talk about it. So what are the implications of culture and customs of Sri Lanka in establishing sex education here?
Okay, let's begin with the debacle end of last year, early this year on Ape Hate Pota.
Yes.
Okay, no, Hate Ape Pota or whatever, one of those. Right now, this is a good example of why organizations like you need to join the fray. What was this book really? Okay, this book, from what we have ascertained, has been advocated or come up with a parliamentary group funded by an international funding agency, okay, to come up with an extracurricular activity for kids in grade 7 upwards, okay. Now, if you take a look at the information within this Hate Ape Pota, you will find that it is the identical information, or a bit more nuanced, I have to admit, but very similar information to what is existing in the health book already. So then it begs the question, why did we need this extracurricular book to be produced, and why didn't we focus on our existing health science? Because when the Venerable Mark came out in opposition to this text, this stuff has been in the health science curricula for years. It didn't suddenly appear in the Ape Hate Pota in 2020 or at the end of 2019. This has been there for years. So again, what we need to do is we need to really educate people on the science behind one. And with a reference to the point of culture, that is where we have to look at a kind of generational change, right? So when I mean generational change, what I mean here is, again, early childhood learning. I can't stress enough how important early childhood learning is to making these attitudinal and behavioral changes down the line, okay? Because unless we work with our young children for them to divest themselves of the shame that they associate with their bodies, then we are not going to get anywhere. We associate shame so much with our nakedness and our nudity, right? So, for example, a friend of mine, he taught his son, you know how you give euphemisms for genitalia? Birdie or kurulla, I'm talking about in male sense. Birdie, kurulla. What were the euphemisms for a vagina? What did they say to you?
See, we never really used euphemisms at all also. It was just
that
area. Female parts. That's
female
it.
Parts. Okay, so that, yes, that's a euphemism. Female part is a euphemism.
Yeah,
okay?
I guess so.
Okay, so he got his son to call his penis Chia. Mage Chia. Now, just take a look at the immediate negative association that this boy now grew up with in terms of his genitalia, right? So this is what I mean. When we are talking about education around sex and reproduction, one of the key stakeholders here and must be parents. And that is why a program in schools is so sensible, right? Because a school brings together those stakeholders. You have the child, you have the parent who is also now accessible through the school. So any good program, while you're looking to work with the children, must also counter that and work with the parents, because what they learn in school, they're going to go home and have a conversation on. Okay. So for example, when we write, or we used to write, we don't anymore, but we used to write curricula for certain schools, part of that was a very interactive parent manual, where kids had to go home and ask parents questions about when they were growing up. And I used to get phone calls from mothers and fathers both, awkward phone calls saying, my child is coming and asking me these questions. How do I respond? And I say, respond honestly. You have to respond honestly. It's about building communication between parent and child. And that is another integral part of any good program that discusses sex, reproduction, and relationships. How do we build the communication between parent and child? How do we help the parent who now has this cultural ingraining on shame that is associated with the body, shame that is associated with sex, so that all 21 million of us have come from stalks? You know what I mean? The shame that is associated with that, how do we help battle that? So we need to help battle that with the parents as we work with the children and look 30 years down the line. Our problem is that we are not looking 30 years down the line. Our problem is that we think that we have a quick fix, for example, with adolescents. I can't tell you how many adolescent programs I have been a part of, or peer educator programs that I have been a part of, funded by the UN, funded by all sorts of UN bodies and international bodies. And then they get me to come and they work with these 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. Sorry, too late. Too late. Your hit rate at changing an attitude or behavior when someone is 17, 18 is minuscule. Out of a group of 30, you will hit maybe it's nonsensical actually to think that working with adolescents is going to change much. Pre-adolescents, better hit rate, but work young. Now the thing is, you got to help people understand. Then that's why sex education becomes problematic, because when you say sex education and then you say primary school, they think you're going to talk about condoms to toddlers. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They have not understood the science behind it. Now, I'm sure you guys have taken a look at the UNESCO Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. It is, if you haven't, go and take a look at it, right? It is possibly the most comprehensive approach that has been put together. You can find it on our website, bakamono.lk. It is possibly the most comprehensive approach that has been put together. And what we are doing currently is we are taking a look at this UNESCO Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, and we are juxtaposing it with our health and physical education and seeing where the gaps are. And I can share the preliminary findings with you guys at some point. It's just for us, for our understanding, not to be published, to see how stark those gaps are. And the stark areas of the gaps is, again, not so much in the information around body parts. It's not about the penises and the vaginas. It's about how we treat each other.
Yeah.
Right? It's about how we treat each other. And our work with cyber exploitation, for example, or the fallout that happens when relationships go wrong and nudes are shared and videos are shared, our work there has really shown us that one of the things that we don't seem to know is how to end a relationship in a healthy manner, right? So sometimes when we're writing curriculars, age-appropriate curriculars, or we're working in an age-appropriate manner, part of our sex and reproduction approach should be to kids how to maintain a relationship and also how to end a relationship. We need to tell our kids how to end relationships without being part of some kind of revenge porn culture, right? Yes. But then again, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with primarily in Sri Lanka, Illankana Sanskutiya, right? If the girls, especially the girls, if in any way they are sexually violated or have experienced sexual violence, most often, what are the first questions in your experience? In my experience, what were you wearing? What
Why
time
did you do something? Yeah.
Why didn't you do something? What time What time did you go out? Were you alone? And as a young woman in Sri Lanka, I don't have to tell you, and as a group of young women who have started this, I understand your pain. You know how you are being perceived, how you have been objectified. You know more than anyone the sense of entitlement that has been given to men and boys like us, right? We were given such a sense of entitlement in terms of who we were and where our position was in comparison to the position of a woman, right? I just finished a session with boys at a leading school, and I was trying to get them to understand. I live now in Ibbagamua, very close to where the captain of the Sri Lankan women's team came from, right? And her mom still lives here. I mean, Chamari Atapattu, if you see her playing cricket, she had a wonderful century, T20 century against Australia. If you see her playing cricket, she's playing cricket.
Yes.
You know what I mean? She's not playing cricket like a girl. She's playing cricket, right? If you, what I do when I go and speak to teams, if it's a rugby team, I show them the Sri Lanka Sevens rugby team, or I show them the All Blacks rugby team. And I say, please run like a girl, because if you run like a girl, you might score a try. You know what I mean? So this we have to change this narrative. It is not just about penises and vaginas. We have to change the narrative. So equality, equity, definitely part of that change. But how do we do it in a meaningful way? And that's why I'm having these conversations with you, because education within a school system is one of the most sensible ways forward, provided that the powers that be have the political will to do so.
Yes, and I think countries like Finland, they have actually taken this approach to kindergartners, where they're not talking about sex education, they're talking about respecting people, how to behave like a human. And that is the problem with sex education, I think, because you're so focused on the sex part, you're not focused on the fact this is with another person that I'm doing this.
So that's why at Grassrooted we don't say sex ed anymore. Machang, we say relationship education, of which sex and reproduction is an integral part.
Yes.
That's why we've changed that terminology, not just to be sensitive to Sri Lanka, but to be factually correct in terms of our approach, because it is about relationships. And unless people understand that we need to take a look at this holistic view, like Finland has done. I mean, Finland is a holistic view. I mean, Finland is not just with relationships, and I mean the education system in general is wonderful. I begin to tell you how wonderful that is, because I've been looking at it a little bit. I mean, they teach maths, history, and geography together by looking at the World War. So they look at the World War, and then that's history. That's geography given where the battles are happening, and it's maths in terms of troop numbers, how many bullets, how many bombs. You know what I mean? Everything so beautifully integrated. But coming back to our area, we need to work. You as an entity really need to work with parent bodies and teacher bodies to bring these stakeholders on board and help them understand the science of what is being attempted here. What is the science in terms of attitudinal and behavioral change that we're looking at? So to tell you frankly, when people come and say, can you be part of this campaign and can you be part of that campaign? No, I don't want to be part of campaigns anymore, because I have seen the efficacy of campaigns. I have seen what campaigns do. I have not stood on the side of a road for years. I think the last time was 2012. People are always asking me, come and hold up this board. And I say, Machang, I remember. So 2012, I was standing at Lipton Circus. It was 1 Billion Rising, okay? Big Colombo activist group. Lipton Circus covered. And I was holding up this board which says, don't hit your wife. Or something of that. Right? I was holding up that board. And this guy in a Jeep, he slowed down near me, he rolled the shutter down and he looked at the board, he read the board, then he looked at my face, didn't smile, do anything, he just looked straight, rolled the shutter up and read. And I thought to myself, මූ අද ගිහිල්ලා සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ගෙදර ගිහිල්ලා ගෑනිට ගහන පුද්ගලයෙක් නම් මගේ අද මේ බෝඩ් එක කියවලා ගෙදර ගිහිල්ලා ගෑනිට ගහන්න නැතුව ඉඳීද right? And my answer was no. If he read my board, that 30 seconds of reading my board was not going to change his attitude in the way he was going to treat his wife.
Yes.
And that is the day that I stopped campaigning and standing on roadsides and decided that if we're going to do this, we have to work with our teachers and we have to work with our parents. It is much slower. It is much harder. It is less glamorous. Not many people see the results of it. It is not as visible and as engaging as a campaign. And that is not to say campaign shouldn't happen. I'm not saying no campaign should happen. What I'm trying to say is that you must try and work at all levels and you must hit at all levels. The campaigns that happen on social media are going to have absolutely limited impact just for the purposes of numbers. I mean, we have 6 million Facebook accounts in this country. We have about 40% of the country, maybe close to 50% of the country that is online. You know what I mean? We don't have the numbers yet to do a Facebook campaign or do a campaign and say, okay, we've done something. We really need to get to the grassroots and start talking to parents and teachers. And I think you guys are really well placed to do so also.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Because we're also still starting off, and we thought this would be the perfect topic to start off because it's so essential in this country. And there's maybe about 100, 200 people who agree that sex education is important, to learn a lot from it. And one of the things that I've seen, so we are all university undergrads, majority of us. And we have courses on sex education, but there is so much discrimination. The teacher doesn't know how to explain menstruation. And I'm the student sitting in that class and I know what's happening inside my body. And she being a woman, she doesn't know what's happening inside her body. And she just laughs it off. That is the worst part, I think, because whenever we're given education, we're just laughing at it. And that should be changed, in my opinion, because there is no way. Like, a few of us will know, but if the teacher doesn't know what's happening inside her body and she cannot explain it to us as students, then that is a bad thing. I think that is what you were saying about like the health and education teachers. And these are...
I don't know if you heard this story. I often tell this story, so you might have heard it. It's about a health science teacher. And when I work with health science teachers, my first go-to is menstruation. Because that is always, as you have very rightly pointed out, that is always a very good gauge of where they are.
Yes.
Okay? So I went to this health science, huge school. I can't tell you the name of the school. All the health science faculty. And I said, Hari, mata osap chakriya gana kiyala denna. And I gave the whiteboard and a pen to this lady. She was the head of the department, 13 years working in that school. And she went up to the whiteboard and this is what she did. She drew the internal organs. So she drew the Dimbakosha, fallopian nala, garbhashaya, yoni marge, perfectly drawn. And then this is what she said. Dimbakoshayen dimbayak pitat veddi tuwalayak ඇති වෙනවා. ඒ තුවාලයෙන් ලේ ඉල්ලා fallopian nale හරහා ඇවිල්ලා ගර්භාෂය තුලින් ඇවිල්ලා යෝනි මාර්ගයෙන් පිටත් වෙනවා. Right. Now, I was shell shocked. She had the conviction that her story was right. The conviction enough to stand up in front of this group of other health science teachers, stand up in front of a trainer and say that this is how the menstrual cycle works. So I said, Madam, endometrium එක ගැන, and then she looked really. So I said, would anybody else like to try and tell me how menstruation works? And then someone got up and gladfully talked about the endometrium and garbhashaya bitti and all that, and then we had a conversation. But my point is, this is the story she had been told. This is what she had learned. So your teacher has not been told. She has not learned. She has not wanted to learn. So this teacher is supposed to be teaching this lesson in her classroom, right? So she has not read her own textbook, which I pointed out to her. I said, Madam, our textbook right? So take a look at how taboo it is. Every school I go to, I say, hands up, if you think menstrual blood is unclean. That's one of my first questions. Hands up if menstrual blood is unclean, and what do you think the number of hands are? Over 50%. And the ones who don't put their hands up are just not sure because they think, okay, this is a trick question.
Yes.
Right? Menstrual blood is unclean. So I always say, take menstrual blood, put it under a microscope, take blood from your finger, put it under a microscope, and tell me what are these? How is it unclean? How is it different? It's tissue, it's blood, it's your vaginal wall. It's part of you. Take a apavitra, it's unclean. It's the body is getting rid of it. No, the body is not getting rid of anything. The body is preparing for something beautiful. I mean, it's the narrative. It's the narrative. How have we told that story? It's the narrative. And until we again come back to the science and manage to keep that discussion, like boys have asked girls to hold in their period, like peeing. Why can't you just hold it in? I mean, no idea. Boys think that girls urinate from their vaginal opening.
Yes, right? I have personally experienced that.
Right? So why? Because we have the lesson. Everything is there. There might be no mention of the clitoris, but everything else is there. I don't know why they're not mentioning the clitoris. They should mention the clitoris. There should be a lesson on sexual pleasure, of course, but it's there. Why are men walking around thinking that you pee out of your vagina? It's ridiculous. Right? So to your point, how do we change it? We have to go into schools. We have to get the parents on board.
Yeah.
And maybe you need to go and have a conversation with your administrators at the university. Get someone who talks about menstruation to come and teach about menstruation, or at least teach the teacher who is supposing to teach. But do it. In my advice, do it as gently and as friendly in a manner as possible. This is not embarrassing other people. This is helping them understand that there is value to what they are doing. A lot of health science teachers don't think that there is value to what they are doing. And one of the things we tell them is, you are on the front lines here. You are who people are going to look to for information. Because no one else is talking about it. In our culture, when no one is talking about sex and reproduction, you are the only one talking about sex and reproduction. People are going to come to you, and good health science teachers have an influx of people. They can't cope, right? Because they are sensitive. They are following the teacher guide. They are reading the teacher guide and following the teacher guide, including teaching menstruation as something that is not unclean. It's there, right? So that is what we have to try and do more and more. Build allies with the existing teachers as we move forward.
Another point that has been bothering me is the LGBTQ community. It's not that they're bothering me, it's just there's no education on the LGBTQ community. In fact, we learned it after we left school, and how normalized it was. And I went to all-girls schools, as many schools in this country, where there were lesbian relationships, and they were so frowned upon, and they were humiliated. They were not allowed to do certain sports. And what is the importance of having a curriculum that is inclusive of LGBTQ community, that allows children of this community to know that they are not alone and they are not a wrong person, there's not something wrong with them, that they are born this way, and how important it is for them to understand that this is a thing that is common to a lot of people, and a lot of people share it, and how inclusivity is necessary in sex education.
Okay. So I'll give you an example. We wrote a curricula for a school which included a lesson on sexual orientation. The lesson on sexual orientation was just facts. This is what sexual orientation means. These are the most common forms of sexual orientation: heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality, pansexuality, asexuality. These are the laws in Sri Lanka that criminalize sexuality. in 1992, the World Health Organization declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. Stuff like that, right? Very fact-based. We had an enormous battle with the school authorities in the inclusion of that subject. Our line was, we are only stating facts. We are not stating anything other than the fact. Even the lesson was structured. This is the information, this is the science, these are the facts. Including our laws, including all that. So it was not like we were in any way, as people say hilariously, trying to promote homosexuality. You can't promote homosexuality. Like you can promote heterosexuality. Right? So anyway, so then they fought with us and we got it included, but then they came up with a caveat where they cancelled the entire lesson structure for that grade. So the grade that we had included, that they cancelled that, right? So we let that be. Now I am of the view, now Grassrooted, for example, our main, if you want to say, goal is human dignity, okay? For me, human dignity means human dignity. It's quite simple. So I am of the view that we need to, while we need now in the interim to talk about the science of sexual orientation and gender identity, while we need to talk about the declassification of it as a mental illness, while we need to even maybe promote the fact that in 2018, the Sri Lanka College of Psychiatry declassified it as a mental illness. So that's huge. Took them a while after WHO, but WHO took a long time after American Psychiatric Association in 71, right? So 71, 92, and then us in 2018. So yes, that information needs to be out there in terms of normalizing it, and you can start talking to, yes, maybe adolescents and up, that everybody is equal and this is part of how we are born. This is the science behind sexual orientation and gender identity, very important. But I want to come to early childhood and I want to come back to respect. I want to come back to empathy. I want to come back to value another person, who that person is, regardless, right? So if we're talking about dignity, it's regardless, right? Regardless whether you're a man or a woman or someone who identifies as trans or someone who is gay, lesbian, pansexual, regardless, right? Regardless whether you are a worker, a community that we work in is vilified in ways that I can't even begin to tell you how, right? Okay, regardless of the person who uses drugs, and the person who uses drugs is right at the bottom. Okay, so if you want to take a look at layers of stigma and discrimination, the person who uses drugs, the kudda, is right at the bottom. If you want someone who is subhuman, take a look at the kudda. Take a look at how the COVID-19 spread among the naval camp of this country was blamed on the people who use drugs. Okay, because it's the easiest case. Right, so we work with marginalized groups. I want an education system where our kids are taught to value another human being regardless. That is a goal. But while that goal is to be attained in your lifetime, hopefully, maybe not mine, while the goal is to be attained, I agree with you 100%. We need to put the science out. And part of that science is our science, right? Our science, Sri Lankan science. The Sri Lankan School of Psychiatry and what it has said. How in Sri Lanka you are allowed to have gender reassignment surgery in government hospital. Agama hospital will give you a boob job if you want, right? That's what I'm talking about. So that is possible. Your birth certificate, that is possible. Right? So we have things that happen to the benefit of the trans community, to the benefit of the gay community in Sri Lanka. We need to focus on that from there. We don't need to talk about, we can talk about India if you like, in terms of how that can help overturn, like they overturned 377 of their penal code, which was very much like our 365, how that process can. We can learn. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to bring together our the Sri Lankan community. Now, unfortunately, and you may learn this, what we need to do is make sure that everybody is pulling in the same direction. And unfortunately, not everybody likes to pull in the same direction. Even those who are such so-called communities, right? So we need to help those of us who are outside of these communities, those of us who are allies of these communities. We need to really pay attention to them and how they want to move forward. Help them with ideas, help them, but let that leadership be there. They don't need it. They are an empowered community, increasingly more and more an empowered community, and they can go forward. But where can you? Because I'm noticing a very strong, and I love it, a very strong scientific basic for you, right? You have this foundation which I said you're building on research, which I think is a wonderful. And that's where we can support this, right? How we as academics, if you like to call yourself an academic, it doesn't matter. Nothing wrong with being an academic. Whereas we as academics can support this, young academics like you can support this process, learning with, working with this community. And part of that is maybe taking a look at what Ali Sabri has been saying recently, right? I mean, talking about the 4 anal exams, vaginal exams. Okay, another ridiculous manifestation of what we're dealing with. How do we build on that potential momentum? What can we do there? Can we get him to talk about it more, for example? Can you get him to come to university, for example, and have a chat about it? You know what I mean? How do we amplify that? And it doesn't become yesterday's news story that ends up lining some shelf with dirty glasses on it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so those are the areas I feel that we can very strongly, work together and link together on.
Mm-hmm. Now, thank you very much for your this thing. But I want to talk about the critiques, playing devil's advocate here. One of the critiques is that it is too westernized a concept to bring to Sri Lanka, which is obscene because the key sex education that is provided in America is abstinence. They talk about don't have sex before marriage and they hand out condoms. That is it. But there is also a massive amount of teen pregnancies that are arising in USA. And clearly, abstinence doesn't work there. So what is your attitude towards that this argument that it is a westernized concept?
No, it can't be westernized. See, to talk about sex and reproduction can't be westernized now. Because that means our penises and vaginas are also then westernized.
Yes.
Right. And also what we need to do is take a look at maybe the sexual liberty within which we acted and not hang on to this post-Victorian norms and mores that seem to define what the Sri Lankan culture has become. Right. So if you want to talk about westernized in terms of that being the root of that being the historical root of sex education, then I think there is enough information on our side in terms of how sexual we were as a people. There is a wonderful, I'll try and remember, there is a wonderful publication done by ICES on the carvings, the erotic carvings of Sri Lanka. You got to take a look at it, okay? If you haven't taken a look at it, it's online. It's wonderful, right? And how far back that goes. We go back. Sri Lanka goes back. I think it's in Kilinochchi they found this. We go back to that fundamental, basic fertility symbol, right? With massive, voluptuous buttocks and a huge vagina and breasts. That fertility symbol, there's been a fertility symbol found here in Kilinochchi, right? Where we were sort of venerating the female form. And that sensuality, that sexuality, I mean, you don't have to just go to Sigri, you don't have to limit yourself to Sigri Apsaras at all. It's across this country if you really want to look for it. Okay, if you really want to look for it, you can find it, and it's academically authenticated. So this is not some idea that is being put forward, right? So then you got to take a look at this sort of post-colonial, Victorian mindset, Christian, fundamentally Christian mindset that has come into play. So if you take a look at, for example, let's come back to sexual orientation. Let's come back to abortion. Let's take a look at the laws that we have written, those regressive laws that we have in place. How old are these regressive laws? Let's take a look at how old the brothels ordinances and the vagrancy ordinances that is used to persecute people who are sex workers. Look at these laws. When were these laws written? Right? When were these laws written? What was the idea behind these laws?
I'm sorry, I think your connection is a bit upset. You go in and out.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
So where did these laws come from? Who wrote these laws? It's very important to take a look at that. Right? And if you want to talk about our culture, අපේ සංස්කෘතිය ගැන කතා කරන්න ඕන නම් එහෙනම් අපේ සංස්කෘතිය ගැන කතා කරමු. අපේ සංස්කෘතිය මොකක්ද? ඇත්තටම අපේ සංස්කෘතිය මොකක්ද? අපේ ඉතිහාසය මොකක්ද? What is our history? What is our culture? Right? So right now, why have we narrowed ourselves and limited ourselves to this post-colonial Victorian Christian sort of mindset? What's the thinking in that? Right? Why, in whose interest is it that we remain here? I think that is the larger question. That is the larger question that emerges for me more and more. In whose interest is it that we remain here? In whose interest is it that we have this kind of rote learning education system where you go in and you suck it all up at exam time and you vomit it all out, where you are not taught to think? In whose interest is that? It used to be in the interest of the colonial masters, right? They wanted schools like St. Thomas's College and the Academy, now called Royal College. They wanted schools like that to have everybody dressed nicely in white and hair at a certain length and no facial hair and discipline and doing a march past. What the hell is a march past? Are you a part of what is a march past? Why are these lower school children and middle school children and upper school children doing a march past, this military parade for what? What athletic prowess is there in a march past? All the buggers who couldn't run and couldn't throw were in the march past, these poor chaps. Marching past like military drilling. What is in whose interest? In whose interest to create this mold? This mold where හැමෝම ඊට පස්සේ type වල දාලා වැඩට යනවා to earn. Not ask questions. Don't ask questions. This is the way it is. Don't ask questions. In whose interest is it to have this education system? So at that point, it was the feudal lords, the British. Now, maybe there's a political feudal class that is in play.
I think it's just that we are so afraid of change that we are stuck in 300-year-old ways.
Correct. But if we changed, or if they changed us in the 1800s, after thousands of years, then maybe we can change again, no?
Yes, that is so true.
Maybe we can change again. And we are changing. I mean, look at you. I mean, look at your group. We are changing. Things are moving forward. We just need to widen the hit rate.
Yes, that is so true. The last point I wanted to talk to was on mental illness. And there are like a lot of diseases that have been diagnosed regarding mental illness, and how mental illness is also something that should be diagnosed as a disease and not be relegated to something less than physical disease. And so people with these diseases, what is your opinion on educating them on respect and consent and sex education? Like not mentally challenged people or mentally disabled people. What is your opinion on educating them, and how should we educate them?
Okay, you have asked a question that needs a specific answer. Now, my work in terms of sex and reproduction and relationships with those within, let's say, special needs groups, for example, has been limited to one school that we worked with. A school invited us in to work with their special needs adolescents. One thing you learn very quickly is that special needs is a very wide spectrum. So if you take, for example, attention deficit disorders, or if you take any kind of special need, there is a spectrum even there, right? And then you're bringing this diverse group within one setting. So the reason they called us in was because these adolescents were experiencing what any adolescent would experience in terms of hormones, in terms of their genitalia, in terms of development, bodily development. So you would have kids with no filters who would be touching themselves within the class, things like that, right? So for that, we brought in psychologists who had worked with kids who have special needs to put in place this program. It was not something that I was going to dabble with myself. Okay, so I learned a lot during that process while putting that program in place. What I also learned during that process again is how key, even then, parents were to this. Because the first conversations we had when we were putting that program in place were with the parents. And parents telling us, please put this in place. Please tell us how to talk to our kids about this. Because people seem to think that our kids are asexual. Our kids are not asexual. Okay? Our kids are having these feelings. Our kids are having these desires. They are not asexual. To think that kids who have special needs are asexual, I learned there is an absolute misnomer. I kind of knew it, but then I really learned it there. Okay, and I learned it from those very compassionate parents who wanted their children to have as regular a life as they could give them. Okay, so now let's come back from there. Let's push back a little to our general attitude towards, let's say, even anxiety and depression. Let's put special needs aside for a moment and come to anxiety and depression. And let's take a look at the stigma around those who feel anxiety and depression. Let's take a look at how they are treated. Let's take a look at the pressure that those who have anxiety and depression put upon themselves because there is no societal support structure in general for them, right? And again, things are changing. There are some wonderful young psychologists, counseling psychologists that are emerging. We work very closely with a hotline, CCC hotline 1333. So most of the cases that we get on mental health, we refer because we are not mental health experts and we don't work on mental health. So we refer all our cases. But in terms of anxiety and depression, also a lot of parents come to us. My son is like this, my daughter is like this. And then we have a referral network where we send them to those specialists, those counseling psychologists, those who are trained, those who we have vetted. Okay. Because what the worst thing you can do is send someone to a counselor who has had a 3-day course and a certificate to say he's a counselor. You know what I mean? Right? So you need to make sure that the people that you are sending to have the requisite skills to deal with it. But let's come back in terms of our wider education angle. What do we need to do here? We need to demystify. We need to demystify mental health. We need to help people come forward for assistance. If you are a young man in this country with the kind of patriarchal machismo that we have been fed from the time we were walking around, I suppose, or even before, how weak are we when we come forward and say we have a problem? Look at the names that we are called. We are called derogatory names. Derogatory names that actually cross-cut in terms of even being a homosexual, because being homosexual and the derogatory name sometimes go together. And that gives you an indicator of how we think of those who are gay also. You know what I mean? So we have this mishmash. We have this mishmash in terms of how we respond to anyone who is different, those with mental health, those who love someone who is of the same sex. I mean, we have this general stigma and discrimination that we direct at whoever does not conform to the norms and mores that we have set as a right? So how do we target that? And to target that, like a broken record, I come back to early childhood learning. I come back to respect, to empathy, to consent, to trust, teaching kids how to be sensible, and teaching kids to value another human being, regardless of who that human being is, and then just valuing everyone, really. It's just valuing the planet. If you want to go there, you know what I mean? I mean, it's part of the DNA, because if you value another human being, you are going to be valuing the planet, right? Because if you value another human being, you are valuing the human beings to come also. And possibly you might be a little less selfish, possibly. But that's another discussion. But teaching young people to value each other, if we can do that, then I would wager that the policeman may not discriminate the sex worker if he has come through a program like that where he values another human being. I would wager that the lawyers and all these professionals, the administrators who come through that education system, I would wager, as culture develops, as culture transcends and changes, like what they did in Finland, right? Like what they've done. If you think Finland happened yesterday, no. They took a conscious decision to look at their education system and to change that, because they were thinking long term about what kind of human beings they wanted to work with, right? So someone was there, someone had the political will to do that. It was in the interest of someone to make sure that we had that more sort of a society that prides itself on equity and equality. At the moment, it is not in the interest of anyone in Sri Lanka, it appears, to give equality and equity a fair go.
Yes, I think that is shown through the lack of a women's ministry and the fact that it has been relegated to a minor ministry, and the minister in charge of it also is a man, and the lack of political participation. There's so many things that we have to work on in this country.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, while you work on those, think 30 years ahead and work with our kids.
Definitely.
That's what I'm trying to say here. Because if we work only on those, in 30 years, we will find that we are still there. Now, Bakamono supports a local organization here called Women's Development Foundation. They have been in operation since the 80s, early 80s. And they do a newsletter which we help them revive called Atwala. And I was reading their Atwala from 81. And I was reading the problems that women face in 81. So we are talking 39 years ago, okay? And guess what? Same problems. Same problem. Sexual harassment on buses, stuff around abortion, stuff around domestic violence, stuff around just open sexism, stuff around no equal opportunity. Same problems, Macha. 2020, same problems. You might have moved a little bit, but maybe you haven't moved here. Maybe you haven't moved in Colombo either. Same problems, right? Yeah. So why are there the same problems? Because somewhere we are not getting it right. So all our efforts, including mine, all the efforts that we have been putting in to the campaigns and to working with out-of-school youth, because it's much easier to work with out-of-school youth than to work with in-school youth. That's why all these organizations work with out-of-school youth. Much easier to get together, easier to put together in a room and take some pictures and put up a program and say, hey, look what we've done. Right? Much easier. I know an organization that deemed it prudent to say that comprehensive sexuality education was doing a 3-hour session for 800 students in a hall. Can you believe it? 3 hours. They went to a hall, put 800 kids together in a hall, O-level up, and they shouted at these kids for 3 hours, and then they went and said, we covered 800 kids with comprehensive sexuality education. What was your hit rate in that hall? Are you mad? What are you doing? Right? It's just pathetic. Pathetic if that kind of inflation of numbers, because that is what donors are asking for, is what makes you think that is comprehensive sexuality education. Okay? I can't yet tell you the organization. It's a very well-known organization. I can't tell you because I just don't want to yet. But I told them, what the fuck? But the point here is, pardon my language, the point here is that we need to do real stuff. And I think find your niche and do real stuff. And then, I mean, you have our support as long as we continue to do that.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, sir, that it has been absolutely incredible talking to you. And we thank you on behalf of IGSL. We thank you so much for coming. So thank you so much for coming. And
You're welcome.
I'm only disappointed that we couldn't meet you in person. I think
I'm sure a trip to Ibagamo is on the card.
Definitely.
Whenever things allow, we'll make that happen.
Yes,
okay?
Definitely. Thank you so much, sir. And
good luck.
Thank you very much. We hope to continue this relationship. Thank you so much.